President Trump and a candidate for governor. As U.S. Attorney, Bill stood up for law and order over the objections of Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner and aggressively prosecuted the violent rioters who looted businesses, torched cop cars, assaulted police, and tried to destroy Philadelphia. As governor, Bill's priorities would be strengthening our economy, reducing crime, promoting school choice, and securing our election. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura. It's nice to see everybody this evening. I thought maybe I would tell you a little bit more about myself, my motivations for getting into the race, the issues that I care about, and I would love to take your questions and just have a back and forth about the race because so much is at stake, which is the reason that I'm in it. But I am a native Pennsylvanian. I was born in Philadelphia, and then my family moved out to Chester County when I was 1 year old. So I grew up in Westchester. I attended public schools in Westchester. I graduated from Westchester Henderson High School. And then after that, I went to Yale University where I majored in economics. And then after college, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I'd always been patriotic. I had always had a great love for America and decided, you know what, now it's my obligation, my opportunity to live that. And so I joined the military. I didn't really have anybody pushing me that way. Kind of decision I made within myself. And I like challenges. So I thought to myself, all right, what's the toughest thing I can do? Maybe the Marine Corps. And then in the Marine Corps, okay, what's the biggest challenge there? The infantry. So I'm like, all right, I want to be an infantry officer. So I did that for 4 years. And frankly, I just loved it. I made lifelong friends. I served the country that I love. I learned a heck of a lot about leadership, things that have served me throughout my life, throughout my subsequent legal career. And frankly, it's besides marrying my wife, it's the best decision I've ever made was to join the Marines. So I did that for 4 years, and then I got married my last year in the Marine Corps. Got married in '96, so I had my 25th wedding anniversary coming up on November 2nd. So told my wife the way we're going to celebrate, we're going to go vote. So I went to law school after that. I went to Harvard Law School and really enjoyed law school. I went there because I wanted to continue what I thought of as my life of public service, and I wanted to be a federal prosecutor. So I graduated in 2000, came back to the area, started a family with my wife. We have 4 children. Got 3 boys and a girl. My oldest is 23, my youngest is 15. And I just waited for my opportunity to apply to the U.S. Attorney's Office. So in 2003, I went there, became a federal prosecutor, prosecuted all types of cases. Federal prosecutor offices tend to do a very broad type of work, lots of white collar work, national security, securities cases, sort of sophisticated white collar cases, plus a lot of the violent crime, drug cases, and the things that I really focused on later when I was U.S. Attorney, because Larry Krasner wasn't focusing on those things in Philadelphia. So I learned to be a trial lawyer there. Then I went back to private practice for a while, hoping that I'd have the opportunity to serve as U.S. Attorney and lead that office. Unfortunately, all the sort of stars lined up for me in 2016. We had a Republican president, because U.S. attorneys are presidentially appointed officers. So you have to be in the right party. And so a bunch of Republicans threw their hat in the ring. Generally speaking, the senators from the home states choose the U.S. attorneys. You interview with the senators, and then they put your name up to the White House, and you're vetted, and then you're appointed by the president. So I'm technically appointed by the president. I was appointed by President Trump, but I had to interview with Senator Toomey, and also had to interview with Senator Casey, the Democrat, because our senators tend to sort of share power that way. I think in a healthy kind of way. They communicate with each other, they talk with each other. But certainly Senator Casey was deferring to Senator Toomey's choice, which was me. And I had my dream job for 3 years in the Trump administration, working to keep Philadelphia safe, working to keep you and all your families safe, responsible for the 6 million residents in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, which is Philadelphia, all the collar counties around Philadelphia, as far west as Lancaster, and as far north as Lehigh Valley. So during my time as U.S. Attorney, I really focused on 2 areas. One was a traditional area for federal prosecutors, which is political corruption. The federal prosecutors tend to focus on that because the local prosecutors don't necessarily have the expertise or the resources to do that sort of thing. And sometimes they're aligned with the politicians that are getting investigated. So you have more independence as a federal prosecutor. So we put the Reading mayor, Vaughn Spencer, in jail when I was U.S. attorney. We put the Allentown mayor, Ed Pulaski, in jail when I was U.S. attorney. We indicted John Doherty, who's on the trial right now, who was a union leader in Philadelphia who's been skirting the law for a long time. He's got 3 indictments against him. He's got 3 cases that he's gone up against. This is the first one that you may have seen in the papers lately that he's dealing with. We indicted and convicted just scores of folks, mostly in Philadelphia, frankly, and mostly Democrats. It wasn't because we were targeting Democrats, but corruption is endemic and really fosters when you don't have competition. In my opinion, based on my experience as a prosecutor, when you have people where the competition keeps everybody honest. Right? So if you have one party that dominates, the people in power tend to have a sense of entitlement, right? And they think that they can do sort of whatever they want without any accountability. So in some ways, it was like shooting fish in a barrel doing public corruption cases in Philadelphia, because there were so many Democratic officials and Democratic elected folks who were doing things they shouldn't be doing. So there was that area, and there was also violent crime, as Laura indicated. Larry Krasner was elected about 4.5 years ago for his first term, and immediately the violent crime situation in Philadelphia deteriorated rapidly. I think directly because of his irresponsible policies. There was no deterrence in his regime. There was no support for the police in his regimes. The police were on their heels instead of leaning forward, doing the proactive things they needed to do to protect the community and to protect minorities in particular. Okay, the people who have suffered the most under the irresponsible policies of Larry Krasner are African Americans and other minorities. 90% of the homicide victims, for example, in Philadelphia, are either Black or Latino. Okay, so if you care about Black lives, if you want to put a Black Lives Matter sign in your front lawn, you should be loudly supporting the police, because that's what protects Black lives. Okay, not this nonsense when our governor and our attorney general and others are out there criticizing the police and marching against them and pretending that police are racist murderers when they're just the opposite. They are the people that protect minority communities. So I made a decision about a year into my time as U.S. attorney to really push back on the false narrative that Larry Krasner was peddling and do my best to protect the law-abiding citizens in Philadelphia and the surrounding areas. And that kind of defined my time as U.S. attorney, being that loud counterweight. And we did a lot of violent crime cases. I flooded resources into that area, put a lot of my federal prosecutors that would normally do other types of things. I put them on violent crime cases. I put them on illegal gun cases, and the types of things that Krasner wasn't prosecuting. And I took a lot of cases away from them also. Federal jurisdiction is limited in some ways, so I can't reach into his office and take away every case that he's not prosecuting, because I wouldn't necessarily have jurisdiction, plus I don't have the resources to do that. But I took a lot of them. I took the ones that I thought would make the biggest statement, including the case of Jimmy O'Connor, who was a Philadelphia police corporal, posthumously promoted to sergeant, who was murdered delivering a SWAT warrant with the SWAT team in March of 2020. He was going up the stairs to serve a murder warrant against someone who never should have been on the street in the first place, was only there because Larry Krasner put him there, because he ignored probation violations, ignored other charges, dismissed other charges. And he and his henchmen opened fire on Jimmy O'Connor and his SWAT team going up the stairs. And even though they had all their body armor on, a bullet went underneath his armor into his armpit area and killed him. And I thought it was grotesque that Krasner would be responsible for prosecuting that case when he in fact was responsible for the man's death. So I befriended the family. I became friends with Terry O'Connor, his widow, his 2 children. His daughter was in the Air Force, his son was a Philadelphia police officer. And I prosecuted that case, had our office take that case, pursued the death penalty in that case, something that Krasner also refused to do. Because the family was just, you can imagine what they were going through, losing their loved one, plus they're dealing with the criminal justice system and the Krasner effect, which was causing them even more anxiety. And they were so grateful that we as federal prosecutors would come in and try to get them justice. So Terry O'Connor has become a good friend of mine. And In fact, she's become a supporter of my campaign. When I announced for governor on September 13th in my hometown of Westchester, she was one of the people who introduced me. And I went to her before the campaign started and I said, Terry, you know, I just want you to know what I'm doing, and you know, that law enforcement and public safety is going to be a big part of my platform. You know, would you like to be involved in any way? No pressure on her or anything like that. I never would want to put her in an awkward position. And she immediately was like, I'll do anything. I want to help you. Okay. I want to, you know, can I introduce you at your announcement? I was like, that'd be fantastic. Right. It's almost, I think, it's like cathartic and helpful to her to do this sort of thing, because she's honoring her husband's memory by doing this, and honoring her husband's brothers and sisters in law enforcement by sticking up for law enforcement. So anyway, I gave that job as U.S. Attorney everything I had for the 3 years that I was in it. But when we had a new president come in, at that point, it's my job to resign because it's a presidential appointment. My U.S. Attorney jobs are so you know, enjoyable, good jobs that sometimes U.S. attorneys tend to hold on to them at their fingertips. they have to almost be sort of pushed out the door. I said, you know what? I'm not going to give Joe Biden the satisfaction of firing me. I'm going to resign with dignity and think about the next chapter of my life. So I resigned in January. I went back into private practice, and I love being a lawyer, right? I could be very happy and productive, and my family be happy if I were in private practice for the rest of my life, right? But there's so much at stake in this election, and I want to do my part. And so I decided that I was going to run for governor. I wanted to advocate for things that are important to my family and that I think are important to your families. It's not just public safety and law enforcement, it's the economy, of course. It's something that's always on our minds, and our state has underperformed, unfortunately, in a lot of ways under the Wolf administration. So we need to get that in order. It's education, right? School choice is something that Laura and I were talking about a little bit earlier. That's something that's important to me. And it's something where I think that the time is right for it. 2 or 3 years ago, I don't think that would have gotten people as excited, but as we've lived through the pandemic and seen the malign influence of the teachers unions and how they kept schools closed all over the state and how they actually harmed the kids who are the most vulnerable, the most need to be in school. Again, those are the children that in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and the urban areas that need to be in school the most, they've fallen the most behind because the teachers unions approach this as a way to leverage benefits for themselves instead of thinking about what's right for the kids. So those 3 areas are actually the most important areas that I'm going to talk about in my campaign. Good jobs, good schools, safe neighborhoods. Those are the 3 things that we have Republican solutions, conservative solutions to make people's lives better. And those are also 3 areas that everybody cares about, right? All Republicans care about those, all independents, all Democrats. So it's a way to be inclusive and have a big tent and not only get Republican votes, but get independent votes and Democratic votes, because we're going to need to do that to win back the governor's office. There's about 600 to 700,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans in Pennsylvania. That gap is closing. It used to be a lot bigger. It used to be about 1 million. So the voter registration trends are going in the right way. But we need to have a message in the general election, certainly, that appeals to all types of voters. But I think we have conservative solutions to those issues that are a gateway to a better life for all Pennsylvanians, which is really what motivates me, right? I'm a native son of Pennsylvania. I feel like I've lived the American dream in Pennsylvania. I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I've had. And I want to bring those opportunities to everybody in the state. And I don't want people leaving the state. We are 49th in the country in population growth. Okay, we are almost dead last in population growth because the population goes where the jobs are, right? And there's no excuse for that. And that is because we have leaders who aren't thinking strategically, aren't thinking about growing our state, aren't thinking about prosperity, not doing the things to create the business climate that are going to bring businesses and bring jobs here. And that's something that on the one hand is depressing that we're so underperforming, but on the other hand, we can change it just like that. Because we have a Republican legislature now, and if we pair that with a Republican governor with a spine, and we can transform this state. We can transform it economically, we can transform it in terms of education opportunity, and we can certainly transform it when it comes to public safety. So I'm excited, I'm optimistic. I think 22 is going to be a big Republican year. Everywhere I go when I travel around the state, getting great feedback, lots of enthusiasm, lots of attendance at events. We need to do well on November 2nd on my anniversary. And then use that sort of tailwind from there to go on and succeed in 22. So I've been talking a long time. Maybe at this point I'll pause, if that's okay, and open it up to questions.
Yes.
So I would love to hear what's on your mind.
And can I just say, for those of you on Zoom, if you want to put them in the chat, I can read those as well. If any of you guys have questions.
And if anybody's any questions about the race, inside baseball on the race, or the candidates, or how do we win, how do we beat Josh here, I'll talk about it.
I have a question.
Sure.
I feel like when President Trump lost and through this whole last year, our country has been so caught up, or at least the people that want to acknowledge it, that with like voter integrity, all of these things that need to be put in place, the opposing side, the Democrats, just want to ignore it. And I feel like you running in this race as a Pennsylvanian, I saw what was in the news. I'm very concerned as like a citizen, wondering, are we as Republicans, independents, and even Democrats who are, who want a fair election? I get really worried about that. And I think that that's what a lot of folks sometimes just kind of like pull themselves out because they say, why even bother? It's going to be fixed.
That is how it is.
And that really scares me because just listening to what you're talking about, you need to be heard and you need to have a fair shot.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts about that as
I
far as
do.
when you go into this?
A lot of thoughts about that.
Please share.
Okay, two main things I would say about that. First of all, if anybody gets discouraged, like Republicans can't win, why do we even want to vote? My vote isn't going to count. Okay, you need to sort of put 2020 in perspective and explain we actually did well in 2020. Okay, we elected more members to our state legislature than previously. We improved our margin of state legislature. We elected 2 statewide row officers, treasurer and auditor general. Okay, Stacey Gary is a treasurer, and Tim DeFore is the auditor general. Those are the first statewide row officer candidates in a long time that Republicans have won. So we can win, and we will win in 22 under the current regime. So we do want people to come out, and we don't want them to feel like it's pointless because Democrats are going to win everything. They're not going to win everything. In fact, on balance, in 2020, it's tough to swallow because the top of the ticket Biden won, but we did pretty well down ballot. Okay. But secondly, your concerns about election integrity are absolutely real. And I wrote an editorial that was published last week, which I'll share with Laura, maybe you can send it to your membership, talking about how, okay, I don't start by talking about fraud, because as soon as you say the F word, as soon as you say fraud, the Democrats completely just blow it off and say, you're just talking about the big lie, you're talking about the big steal, you're just repeating what Trump is saying, we didn't want to hear it. So I didn't talk about fraud in the election. What I talked about was how at every step, the Democrats in charge who were running the election, Wolf, Shapiro, Kathy Boothbard, who was the Secretary of the Commonwealth at the time, election officials in the counties, they were doing everything possible to tilt the playing field in the Democrats' favor. And let me give you a couple examples. In Philadelphia, and I saw this because I was right down there watching what's going on, even though they weren't, it was more of a state law issue, so I didn't have really the ability to come in there and do anything about it. The administration of the election is a state law issue. Now, if there's fraud, then that's a federal issue. But in Philadelphia, for example, they advertised all over the city that they were going to have early voting. Okay, they were saying, come into our, they call them satellite election offices. We're going to have early voting. And people showed up in droves. And what they were doing was they were handing out mail ballots, and they were having people right there in these, what they were advertising as polling places, fill out their ballot and hand it in. First of all, under Pennsylvania law, there's no such thing as early voting. So that's problematic. Why are you advertising something as early voting and having people literally come in and early vote? Secondly, if you're going to have what's the functional equivalent of a polling place, which is what this was, because people were literally voting in there all day, just happened to be filling out the mail-in ballots and handing them in, you should have the ability to have poll watchers, Republican poll watchers and Democratic poll watchers come in there and observe what's going on. And the city refused to allow any Republicans to watch what was going on because they said that this is not technically a voting place. It's not a polling place, which maybe under the law, they might have been correct, even though they advertised it as a voting center. But my point is that if you already are in a jurisdiction where nobody trusts what goes on with the elections, and Philadelphia has a sordid history of election fraud, some of which I prosecuted, and not about 2020, but previous elections, I actually prosecuted and convicted ballot stuffing election officials in Philadelphia. You should want to be as transparent as possible. You should be bending over backwards so that everybody can see what's going on, so that nobody thinks you have anything to hide. And you should be following not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. If you're going to advertise someplace as an early voting center, you should make sure that you have poll watchers in there watching the voting, and they excluded them. And it causes people to lose faith in the results. It doesn't mean you have proof of fraud. Okay, we don't know. We don't know whether there was any shenanigans going on there because nobody could see it, right? So there are all kinds of examples like that, which I included in my editorial, which I would love for you to read. And one of the things I pointed out too was that, as a federal prosecutor, I was responsible for the enforcement of federal law, but the state prosecutors are the ones that had primary jurisdiction over the election because most of them involve state law. Well, the highest ranking state law enforcement officer in Pennsylvania is Josh Shapiro. He's the state attorney general. And 3 days before the election, he put out a tweet that said Trump can't win, or Trump is going to lose. So I said in my editorial, why would any Pennsylvania, first of all, I can't imagine a more irresponsible statement by a law enforcement officer, which just proves my point that he's actually not a prosecutor and not a law enforcement official. He's purely a politician. He's never prosecuted a case in his life. He doesn't follow the law. He doesn't follow the evidence. He follows his political inclinations. That should have immediately recused him from any examination of the election right there. But why would any Pennsylvanian trust the results of the election, regardless of any proof of fraud, if the highest ranking officer had told everybody the fix is in? That is what he implied. It's 3 days before the election, Trump is going to lose. They're implying the fix is in. One of the points I made in my editorial was that why would anybody trust that? And most don't. And it's not just Republicans, it's independents, it's a lot of Democrats too. They know that the way the election was administered was unfair. So the challenge for us is to be vigilant in 2022 and be ready for these kind of dirty tricks that the Democrats try to foist on us. And we need to win under the current system. Okay, we don't have any choice. No excuse mail-in balloting exists. So we have to embrace that. We have to make sure that our party uses that to its advantage as well. And then once we're back in power in 22, we should examine what is the most fair system for everybody. Do we need to have changes to our system? Do we need things like voter ID? I would say yes. Do we need to get rid of no excuse mail-in balloting? Well, that would be for the legislature to decide, for the public to decide, but I don't think that we should assume that the emergency measures that we put in place to deal with the pandemic should necessarily be the new normal, right? Once the pandemic is over, and we were talking about this earlier about the voting booth, right? When you go into the voting booth, nobody can influence your vote. Nobody can talk to you. Nobody can fill out your ballot for you. Nobody can exert any influence on you. Nobody can take your ballot and hand it in for you. It's the sanctity of the voting booth, right? That is a precious place. And so I think we should be encouraging that kind of voting, and not the kind of voting that is inherently messy. That's right, we were talking about that earlier about that. So
did our legislatures try to do that and it got rejected by Wolf this past year, or what? Why didn't they get it?
Our legislature made a big mistake by passing PACW-October, which is the no excuse mail-in balloting, and they did it on a bipartisan basis, and Republicans went along with it, and it's pushed, not just by Democrats, but also by Republicans. And so that, first of all, that was short-sighted. I don't think that was a good thing to do.
Right.
But then they've realized their mistake, and they've tried to introduce some reforms since then, and Wolf is vetoed.
I see.
So we need to get Wolf out. We need to put Shapiro in there because he will wield his veto pen just like Wolf has, and he will deny the will of the people, right? Because the law is the will of the people, and the folks that make the law are the legislature. So if you're constantly vetoing things, you are anti-democratic. You are denying the will of the people. And Wolf and Shapiro, almost take pride in being anti-democratic in that way, but yet they pretend that they're the ones who are protecting democracy. And meanwhile, they're the ones who are corrupting democracy.
Right.
So it's a long answer to your question, but it's a hard issue.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Sure.
So with that one example that you just explained to us,
Mhm.
in future elections, are they gonna be allowed to do that again, knowing what we know now? Like, is there a way to stop them from doing it again?
Well, unfortunately, under the law, they, or at least according to the judicial decision that came out of that controversy, it's not really a polling place, so they never should advertise it as a polling place, they never should call it early voting, because that's illegal. So they can still set up that kind of thing and exclude poll watchers, but we should continue to exert pressure and say to them, look, this is not transparent. If you're talking about transparency, you should allow poll watchers in there. But the direct answer to your question is we will probably be stuck with a
Okay.
similar situation, but it won't be advertised in the kind of false, misleading way that they advertised it,
Okay.
or it shouldn't be.
Bill, in Delaware County, you probably know that this, that Michael Pupio represented Radnor Township about, because I helped get the people to sign the petitions or bring the case before. And we had a notary, we're running around 10 o'clock at night trying to get people who saw it. One who was down in Chester railroaded over to the corner on the road, but couldn't see a darn thing. And there were 2 other people who saw irregularities. So we chronicled that, and he brought the case before the Supreme Court and did all this work, and they didn't hear it. And then they brought it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court backed down and wouldn't hear it either. We had fraud that happened in this stupid Radnor, just Radnor alone, and let alone the whole state. We all know stories about ballots and the this and that. I mean, the Democrats, my opinion is, I don't know if it's a fact, but they picked certain places in this country from the day Trump won, where they were going to mash it up and cause a problem where they could get the most votes with the least amount of work, ballots stuck in, whatever they did, and making people sign who weren't even people on that thing. So, how is it that the Supreme Court didn't hear that case?
Well, there's a lot in your question there. I will say, first of all, I think it goes to the lack of transparency, which is the thing that really bothers me. Okay, a lot of times at these places that were counting the ballots in the county, in Delaware County, and also in Philadelphia, where they were counting in the convention center, they put people behind barricades that were literally like 100 yards away from the county.
Right.
You can't see anything. Now, technically under the law, at least according to some of the decisions that came out, although the courts sometimes disagreed with each other, the highest court, the Supreme Court, said that still complies with the law as long as they're in the room. Okay, but if you're in the room and you can't even see anything, it doesn't make
And then
right. So I think that's one of the points of my editorial is that the Democrats are doing everything possible to technically comply with the law, but at the same time deny all fairness. Because what they should do is they should be open and transparent and have Democrat and Republican poll watchers standing literally 3 feet away or 6 feet if they want social distancing or whatever, watching what's going on. Unfortunately, we have a very partisan state Supreme Court. And frankly, some of the decisions that they issued having to do with this new Act 77 law were so contrary to the language, literally so contrary to the plain language of the statute, you could only conclude that those justices are no longer acting like judges, they're just acting like partisan politicians.
Right.
And it highlights the importance of electing good judges, okay, who follow the law. And so we've got one judge on the ballot on November 2nd, Kevin Brosnan's running for state Supreme Court. Okay, but even if he wins, it's still going to be a 5-2 Democrat to Republican disadvantage, and there's going to be 2 more seats that are up in the next few years. But we really need to pay attention to those elections because Kevin Brosnan is someone who would follow the law. And in the true, this is what conservatives do when they're on the bench. They follow the law no matter who it helps, right? Their fidelity is to the law. So sometimes they make decisions that they don't even necessarily like the ultimate outcome because they're true to the language of the statute, or they're true to the language of the Constitution. Whereas partisan Democratic judges get in there and they're all result oriented. They're like, okay, what result do I want? And I'm gonna twist myself into a pretzel here and make it happen, instead of being true to the language. So for example, we saw that when they said that you could accept ballots after election day, which was prohibited by the statute. They said you could waive the signature requirement on mail-in ballots. They said you could waive the postmark requirement. These are all requirements that were shall, okay, not maybe, not might, but shall, and they completely ignored it. And that also causes people to not trust the results of the election. But the straight answer to your question is, there's not a good answer until we're in power. We win the governor's race, hopefully we win the Senate race as well, and we can do the things to make sure that everybody has confidence in the results of the election. And we have to have the courage as Republicans to not act in a purely partisan way like the Democrats have, right? Because that's backfired on them, I think. We need to act in a principled way, make it a level playing field so that the voters are the ones who decide. And one of the points I made in my editorial was that when you have a system like that everybody believes in, like with voter ID, it actually increases voter participation because more people come out to vote when they feel like my vote counts and it's going to be fair. And that's why voter ID is broadly popular. It's broadly popular among a majority of African Americans. It's broadly popular, I think, about large pluralities or about half of Democrats also support it, about 90% of Republicans support it. So those are the kind of things that are the kind of reforms that I think will help everybody.
I have a question. So obviously election integrity is the biggest issue, but I have something else to say. I think you covered it. So as governor, are you gonna fight against the Biden regime with what he's doing, you know, all this federal mandates and everything that he's doing? Will you join forces with all the other Republican governors that are fighting against that and trying to protect the people of the state?
One of the things I said in my announcement video, which I hope some of you have seen, and we'll get better around with the folks. It's pretty good. It's about 2 minutes to watch. But one of the things I said when I'm walking in Henderson High School, actually, where I graduated, I said, Iowa as governor will protect you from any threats from the federal government, including any attempts to impose socialism or limit.
Amen.
And I feel very strongly about that. And I'll tell you, you know what, too? I'm actually psyched about getting personally involved in that. Because the way you protect people from those sort of encroachments is you bring lawsuits. Okay, you sue the federal government, or you have to be willing to be litigious, right?
Yeah.
I love being involved. Right? So I actually, one of my dreams as governor is, whether it's that situation or whether it's passing transformative school choice legislation or passing the Taxpayer Protection Act, which will reduce wasteful government spending, or all the different things I think about doing. Wouldn't it be neat if the governor was spearheading that, working with the legislature, passing that legislation, or bringing that lawsuit we're talking about, and then he or she walks into court and argues the case, right? Wouldn't that announce to the world and the state how important it is, right? And you can stare down. Well, you know what? We have to pick and choose. But I argue cases myself in court as U.S. attorney. That is unusual because you're responsible for the operation of the office, and you have to be smart about your time. But are you familiar with Philadelphia's idea of having heroin injection sites in the city?
Yes.
Right? Okay, that was a horrendous idea, I thought. So we, at the U.S. Attorney's Office, were the only game in town that was going to oppose it. Krasner loved it, Kenny loved it.
So sick.
You know, Shapiro wasn't going to stop it. We brought a civil lawsuit, and I walked into district court and I argued the case. And ultimately, I argued the case in the Third Circuit, which is the appellate court for Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, and I won the case in the Third Circuit. So, and I think it helped that it was me arguing it, because it communicated to the judges how committed the office was to the cause. It wasn't like I was just giving it to somebody else and saying, it's really controversial, you know, criticism for this, you know, the left's gonna hate you for it, why don't you just handle it? I said, no, I'm gonna stand there. So if there was an important.
We had a governor that walked in to fight for freedom for Pennsylvanians. I mean,
Did you get
I
rid
would
of
vote
that?
for you forever.
Did you get rid of the heroin sites?
We won that case. There will be no heroin injection sites anywhere in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And it helps to have some lawyers get kind of a bad name sometimes, you know, we criticize, but you know what? Everybody loves lawyers when you're in trouble and you need a craft.
When you need a good lawyer.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I would love to do my thing on behalf of you and the citizens and go into court and argue this kind of cases myself. And that would signal to everybody how important.
That's interesting, yeah.
I have a question for you, Mr. McSwain.
That was gonna be a tough one.
No, it's not, it's actually.
Another lawyer.
It's an easy question. I am a criminal defense attorney, and in fact, I worked for Jack McMahon when he defended Ed Pulaski in Allentown.
Okay.
I defended several of the Greenway guerrillas in South Philadelphia when crime there got so horrific that your office needed to step in when nobody else would, and you put the neighborhood. You put it away and you quieted the neighborhood. I represented a huge international drug importation case that was in your office when you were head of it. And I never thought I would say this because I've spent my entire career challenging the government, shouting down the government. And what I realized under Larry Krasner is that, yes, I want to shout down the government, but I want a government to be there. And my worry is that Philadelphia is lacking a government, and it's a dense part of the state that absorbs resource. It's rife with crime, the education system is crumbling, and it's, you know, it's gonna like sort of drain a lot of resource from the rest of the Commonwealth. And if you were governor, my question is, what are your hopes or your ideas about what can be done to bolster Philadelphia so it doesn't drag the rest of us down?
It's a great question. First, I would say that when you're representing clients who are facing the most serious allegations that you describe, I think you're serving the highest traditions of the profession by doing that. Everybody deserves a vigorous, competent defense, and that's a really American principle. And it's upsetting when you look at sort of what's happened in the last couple of years, where, you know, for example, if anyone wants to represent President Trump, they're blackballed, right? Or, you know, or some call. So I think what you're doing is absolutely in the finest traditions of our profession. Thank you for it. When it comes to fixing Philadelphia, I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do, a lot of problems to deal with, but let me just focus on one: education. Because I think that the Philadelphia education system is a complete failure. It's not a case of underfunding. That's one of the talking points on the left, is underfunded schools. Every article, underfunded schools. These schools have plenty of money. Okay, what they do is they're wasting it. The teachers' unions are calling the shots, and they're not giving parents and students meaningful educational choice to improve their lives. I've toured charter schools and parochial schools and private schools all over the state. And I always ask the principals or give me these tours, what's the cost per pupil? Okay, what are you doing here? This is amazing work you're doing here. And sometimes, like if you're in a middle school and a parochial school, it might be $6,000 or $7,000 per pupil. Or if it's in a high school, it might be in the low teens, okay? The Philadelphia public schools are funded at well over $20,000 per pupil for complete failure. When you look at the number, the very small number of students who read or can do math at grade level, at a proficient level. So educational opportunity is where it starts. Educational choice is where it starts. And we have to hold folks accountable and hold bad schools accountable, because I've also toured a lot of public high schools in Philadelphia, and they resemble nothing less than juvenile detention facilities, right? There's almost no learning going on in these places. So if they are failing, you know, we need to apply the market to that. We need to get rid of those failing schools. We need to give these children more of an opportunity, because education is a gateway to a better life. If you can educate students and give them the opportunities that they deserve, that keeps them out of trouble, right? It enables them to develop the skills so they can get a job, so that when they're finished with their education, they then are a productive citizen. And then you're also not spending a lot of money on the criminal justice system. You're not spending a lot of money on corrections. You're not wasting money dealing with people that are not productive citizens, right? So it all starts with education, and begins with educational choice. And we can pass transformative educational choice school choice legislation in Pennsylvania within 90 days of having a new governor in office, which would begin the long-term improvement of Philadelphia. It's not going to improve overnight. It's not going to go fixed even in a year or two, but I think you can do amazing things in 8 years, right? That's my dream, is to be elected governor and then get reelected, and you can change an entire generation in 8 years. You can have a long 8 years, right? You're talking about kids who are about to go into kindergarten, and then by the time you're done, they're about to go into high school. So if we did this right off the bat, and then we gave true educational choice and quality to students in Philadelphia, in 8 years, you could transform that city. Okay, and it would take care of a lot of the crime problem, it would take care of a lot of the economic problems. And so that's what I'm gonna do.
As a follow-up to that, 'cause I was gonna bring up school choice. So you're saying that, maybe I won't get to this part in a second, but we've seen the past year, we have some of the top schools in the state right around here, TE and rather two of them. In the past year, we've seen issues with the public schools here, as parents are seeing the student taught. The school choice, if money follows the student, there are a lot of great private schools around here, a lot of people move to.
Yep.
It's kind of like support your businesses, you want to support small business, support small business, or well, it's conservative, liberal, your ballot speaks for you. So if the money follows, is that what you're looking for, is money following the student? The second piece is you're saying 90 days, is that a realistic time frame for actually getting it passed? I know, I believe it could get passed, but is that somewhat realistic?
It is realistic, and right now, there's a bill, House Bill 1, which is in the legislature, which does a lot of the things that I'm talking about. Not only does it improve or provide more charter schools, not only does it provide more of these educational tax credit programs where businesses can donate money to education and get a tax credit for it, which allows scholarships for kids to go to private school, but it also creates these education savings accounts where the portion of state funding will literally go to the family. It doesn't go to Philadelphia where it gets forced into it, where it goes to that family in Philadelphia, and they can decide where to spend it. Now, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden magically there's gonna be all these schools that pop up in 2 days, but you have to change the underlying rules and introduce competition, and the demand will create the supply. You will see all these new schools come in. You will see more enrollment in private schools. You will see more enrollment in schools and in creation of schools like Cristo Rey, one of the alternative schools that are in Philadelphia, which has a phenomenal record of success. You'll see a lot of those come in because families will have the money to spend it there, right? They won't be stuck in a failing public school in their neighborhood. So House Bill 1 does a lot of those things already, but Governor Wolf absolutely will veto it. So we could take that and then improve it and tweak it a little bit, and then as governor, I mean, you could just do it through the normal legislative process, or you could hold a special session of legislature. You come in and say, hey, you know what? Now I got a mandate from people. We're gonna have a special legislative session, and we're gonna pass school choice legislation and other things, and we're gonna do it all within the first 90 days, right? And just start off the administration with a bang. Okay, there's nothing that could stop that except Democrats love to go into court and sue over it. So they probably challenge everything that we bring. So that's another reason why you need smart lawyers looking at stuff to make sure that when you're bringing this legislation that will pass constitutional muster and be legal. And then if they're still going to challenge it, you can walk into court, or it's the governor or someone else walking in court to defend it. Okay, so you need to be smart, you need to be thinking ahead. How do I make sure that I preserve this law? I don't want the courts to strike it down. Because the Democrats will fight tooth and nail, the teachers unions will fight tooth and nail because they know their days are numbered. Okay, they know that the parents are not going to just rubber stamp what they're doing. The parents want competition and they want education opportunity for the kids. When you think about it, it's just common sense. Competition makes everything better. In any area of our lives, when there's competition, there's more selection, right? There's better customer service, there's more choice, there's lower prices, right? And if somebody has a monopoly, you don't have any of those things. So why should we give the teachers unions a monopoly? Those days, with a Republican governor, those days are going to be over. But you're going to need somebody with spine because they're going to come at me or whoever's in that position with everything they got, right? And the media is going to be with them. Their lapdogs in the media are going to call us racist. They're going to say we're underfunding schools. They're going to say all this nonsense. And we just have to block it out, do what's right for Pennsylvania, do what's right for Pennsylvania children, and then we'll see the results over time.
Let me ask you, how will you handle, because they are gonna say that, the existing schools, when people start fleeing, I mean, you have to have some sort of incentive for those schools themselves to get better, or they will accuse you, well, you're just leaving kids who can't get out of it.
Competition will make them better, hopefully they will raise their game, but let's say, just keep the numbers simple, let's say there's 10 high schools in an area of Philadelphia, and people start to flee in that area. Well, 5 of them might close, and then the kids will get consolidated down in just the 5 that are left, because people are going on to better things, and hopefully those 5 will then raise their game and realize that there's accountability, and they have to do better, or otherwise everybody's going to leave, right? It should be a pure market-based system.
Right.
But it will take some time, because you don't want kids having to travel 60 miles to high school, right? You're going to need more options within a reasonable geographic area. So it will take time for supply to meet the demand.
I just wish there was an incentive to get the schools that do exist to do better.
Because incentive is survival.
Yeah.
Or literally they will go
Push
extinct.
that.
And it's tough love, but that's what they need, because they've failed generations of kids over and over again, and that's why we have the mess we have in Philadelphia.
I actually started my career as a classroom teacher in the worst neighborhoods I could find in Philadelphia. And I spent a long time thinking about what is going on here. Is it the level of education, or is it something else? And what I realized was that you can educate these Philadelphia kids as much as you want, but if there's not a job to go to, it doesn't really matter. So my question is, as governor, what would you do to bring jobs to Pennsylvania?
Well, I'll start just big picture. You need to create a positive business climate where jobs want to stay here and come here from outside the state. And right now, we do not have that climate. We've got the second highest corporate tax in the country. We have the second highest gas tax in the country. We have one of the highest overall tax burdens on businesses and on individuals. We have a very burdensome regulatory environment where the state regulators look at business as like the bad guy, as the enemy, instead of partnering with business and trying to be helpful in a manner that's going to grow the pie instead of reduce it. We have all these energy resources in other parts of the state, for example, that are completely untapped because we have such an anti-energy regime in Harrisburg. We need to do all these things to try to create a playing field that's more hospitable to job creators and support small businesses instead of destroying them like happened in the pandemic. But then also there's another aspect of it that's more personal. You need a cheerleader for your state. Governor Wolf literally during the pandemic seemed more than happy to run to Mount Wolf in New York, go into his basement and lock the door. Right, he was just completely invisible, doesn't talk to anybody. He doesn't talk to Republicans, he also doesn't even talk to Democrats. You need a cheerleader, and hey, let me show you some nonpartisan, comments here. Ed Rendell was a darn good cheerleader. He was a good cheerleader in Philadelphia. When he was the mayor, he was everywhere. You saw him everywhere, and that's why he became governor, right? Because people had a sense that he really cared about people's lives, and he showed it by showing up. Tom Wolf doesn't show up for anything. I actually think he enjoys the pandemic because it feeds his ultra introverted nature. He doesn't talk or see anybody. Okay, so you need a cheerleader where we have to pass all the legislation that we need to create a more hospitable business climate. We need to make sure the state regulators are doing things to partner with business instead of treat business like the enemy. And then we need that governor to get on the road, okay, and go to other states and say, come to Pennsylvania. And all these people that are in New York and New Jersey are moving down to Florida. I think a lot of them would rather stay in the Northeast, right? Florida is a long way away. It's isolated down there. You're 1,000 miles away, and it's like, maybe you can't even find a Wawa.
They're down there.
I can imagine putting up billboards on the New Jersey Turnpike or the New York Freeway and just being like, come to Pennsylvania, go to business. And you'll be near your family, you'll be near your grandchildren. So the fact that people are fleeing to Florida, I mean, good for Florida, right? They have done the things they need to do to attract people, but we need to attract people too. And right now we're making zero effort to do that. We have people who are happy to fail, and we need to change that.
We have a couple questions off the Zoom and we are coming up on an hour, so I don't want to have you go for too long, but if we can just get these two questions. One is actually from our chairwoman who unfortunately couldn't be here today, Rosanna. She said, I apologize, I'm not able to make it there tonight. Our group is getting bigger and starting to make waves. We've been called names by the left and we know that will continue. What are your thoughts on addressing this and going forward for us getting larger?
A lot of times you need to just ignore the noise, right? You need to be secure in your own principles. And sometimes people call you names because they realize you're getting stronger, right? They're scared of you. They're scared of the truth. They're scared of your power. So just ignore the noise, be focused on what it is that you and your families care about, and just be secure in the knowledge that you can't be stopped, right? And if I were actually governor, another thing I would do is I am a big believer in the First Amendment. Okay, I'm a big believer in freedom of speech in the marketplace of ideas. And so the left doesn't like the marketplace of ideas, right? They want people to shut up who don't agree with them, and they try to put restrictions on people. And I would do everything that I could to give groups like yours and anybody in the state who wants to express themselves the ability to do that without, having their voices muzzled. But I think the direct answer is, if people are calling you names, means you're doing something right.
Good to hear. And then we had one more from Sarah. She said, how can we help you? How can we get you elected if we do not have election reform? So I guess you already sort of worked on the election reform, but how can we help you?
Well, that's a very nice question. So
I bet you have a website.
I have a website, and maybe you could circulate that.
We will.
It's simple, McSwain.com. And the website has information about me, about the issues, about my family. And, this is just sort of a reality of politics. This does have a place to donate if you would like to donate, if you're so inclined, because now we're going to get a little bit into the race. I'll tell you how this race is going to be decided, okay? There's tons and tons of candidates right now on the Republican side, and that to me is a sign of a healthy party. It's a sign of everybody being optimistic about 22. They think it's going to be a Republican year, and so every time Dick and Harry's like, I'll run for governor, I'll throw my hat in the ring, why not me? Well, the way it's going to work is that people are going to be judged based on their fundraising numbers. Okay, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where you separate the whatever analogy you want to use. So the first reporting deadline for governor candidates is the end of the year. So how much money the different governor candidates have raised will be public in January. So between now and the end of December is a sprint to raise money. So I'm out there doing a lot of fundraising, having a lot of fundraising events all over the state. And so anything, if you like what you heard tonight and you want to join the fight, doesn't matter how big or small your donation is, but I would encourage you to go to billmcswain.com, hit the donate tab, give whatever you can, and they'll also get you like on our mailing lists, and you'll get other emails and texts and things, you'll know what's going on. Because if I can demonstrate fundraising strength, strong fundraising by the end of December, I am convinced that I will. Okay, because that will narrow the field. Okay, I will be the front runner at that point. I think I'm the candidate who's the most electable in the general election. And so I need to get out of this sort of chaotic kind of primary situation in order to face Josh Shapiro, who I think I am uniquely situated to go up against him, a lot of because of the violent crime.
If you talk about that, how can you beat Josh?
Sure.
And just quickly as a sidebar, there are more Wawas than you open in Florida than there are.
Yes.
More Wawas.
Okay, well, I think that I've analyzed the situation, I've analyzed the general election, I've analyzed Josh's pros and cons, and he has a two-pronged strategy to the way he thinks he's going to win. And also, it looks like it cleared the field for him on the Democratic side, so he's going to be in the general election. First part of his strategy is what I'll call the Southeastern strategy. Okay, he's going to try to run up big numbers in Philadelphia and in the suburbs and win 5 counties. Okay, Bucks, Montgomery, Delaware, Chester, and Philadelphia, and lose 62 counties. That's the way it works out, and still win. Which is kind of the way Ed Rendell did it. Although Ed Rendell had little pockets of support down in A&E and other places. He can't do that against a strong Southeastern candidate. I've lived in the Southeast my whole life. As US attorney, I'm well known in the Southeast. I think I can do particularly well in Philadelphia, where the violent crime situation is really dire, where a successful Republican candidate statewide might get 16, 17% of the vote in Philadelphia. My goal is to get 25% of the vote in Philadelphia. I think I can do it.
Is that with the crime message?
That's going to be a big part of it.
Choice in crime?
All of it. But I think that the thing that really grabs people's attention is Philadelphia is going to set a record for homicides this year. It's going to blow it away, right? It's also no coincidence it's going to set that record as soon as I'm not US attorney anymore. Okay, because I did everything I could to publicly push back on that, and I'm not there anymore. Okay, and all of a sudden, boom, homicides up over 30%. That's not a coincidence. But we just got to keep things competitive in the Southeast, and we're going to clean up in the rest of the state. So all the voter registration trends are in our favor. We're going to clean up in the T. We're going to clean up in the western part of the state. We just need to be competitive. First of all, I'm from Chester County. I've lived my whole life in Chester County. Okay, I'm going to win Chester County. Bucks County is very similar to Chester County in terms of voter registration and demographics. I think I can win Bucks County. I can keep things close in Montgomery County and Delaware County. And Delaware County is really close to the border there. They're really feeling the crime surge. And I can win that 25% in Philadelphia is my goal. If we come out of the Southeast with that kind of competition, we will win in a landslide. Okay, so Josh Shapiro's dream come true would be to run in the general election against a non-Southeastern candidate, because he knows that he'll clean up in the Southeast. The other part of this strategy is that he's going to try to run his record as state attorney general. He's going to try to pretend that he's Mr. Lawman. Maybe he can get away with that against somebody who's not a prosecutor, who really doesn't know his record that much and really can't talk about his failures as attorney general. Well, I was there. I lived it. Okay, when I stopped Philadelphia from burning the ground during the riots last summer, Josh Shapiro gave me no help. He gave me no help when it came to the violent crime situation in Philadelphia because he's terrified of Larry Krasner. He doesn't want to prosecute any gun crimes in Philadelphia, for example, because that's going to draw the ire of Krasner and people on the left. He gave me no help with the injection site case, and the list goes on and on. Okay, so public safety is going to be a really big issue, maybe the most important issue in 22. Who better to run against a fake prosecutor like Josh Shapiro than a real prosecutor?
If he wants to make it about Trump, how do you respond to this? Do you embrace it? Are you trying to be moderate on it? How do you do it?
Well, first of all, you can embrace it to a certain extent because my connection to Trump is not that I'm some Trump lackey. My connection to Trump is that he appointed me as US attorney. So if you're going to talk about Trump, you're talking about my job as US attorney. You're talking about crime. You're talking about public safety. You're right in my power out. So I will embrace it in that sense. But he is going to do that. He's going to talk about Trump. He's going to talk about
Insurrection.
Yeah, he's going to try to the greatest, the thing that Democrats love more than anything.
He doesn't want to ask you, he wants to run against Trump.
What's running is January 6th and Trump, and they're so excited and grateful for January 6th in some ways. They're really, it's true. That's all they talk about, right? But this election is going to be about the future, right? That's what all elections are. They're about the future. And we have the ideas that will improve people's lives. We have the winning arguments. They have no winning arguments. All they have is complaining about Trump, complaining about January 6th, and trying to bribe people. That's what Biden's doing with all these ridiculous spending plans. They want people to be dependent on government, and they want to bribe people and buy people's votes. They want people to think of the government as their piggy bank. Okay, and that's all they have. They don't have a positive message on the economy, they don't have a positive message on education, a positive message on public safety. They've got terrible messages on those issues. So.
And the border, they're bringing in 100,000 a month to get the voters.
The border matters in Pennsylvania.
Does the governor have any say in sanctuary city laws in Philadelphia, or is that Philadelphia system?
The governor certainly always has a political. The governor can always sort of talk about, the issues in a way that they can affect. And also as governor, you've got a lot of leverage. You've got a lot of levers you can pull in terms of funding and the like. If you don't like something that's happening in Philadelphia, you can choke that city. Okay, so you can do things to improve the public safety situation, even if you don't have direct jurisdiction over something. But just to tie up your Shapiro question, that's how we beat him. We stay competitive in the Southeast with a candidate like me, okay? And we have somebody who's truly dedicated to public safety, who can tell the truth about his record. There's no other prosecutor in the race on the Republican side except me. And Pennsylvania loves to elect Republican prosecutors as governor. The last 3 elected Republican governors we've had were all prosecutors. Governor Corbett was Attorney General and also U.S. Attorney like me. Governor Ridge was an Assistant District Attorney in Erie before he was a congressman. And Governor Thornburg, a popular two-term governor, was a U.S. Attorney in Pittsburgh, just like me. I got almost the exact same resume as Thornburg. So that is an issue that we need to make our own. So again, Josh Shapiro's dream come true is to run against a non-prosecutor from outside the Southeast to run up those numbers. So again, I feel like I occupy a unique lane.
I'm gonna do just one more question from the Zoom, and then the people who are here, you can continue to ask questions
Sure.
afterwards. We had one last question from Sarah, and it's, are you fiscally conservative?
Absolutely and fiscally conservative. The government should, if we expect citizens to invest and balance their checkbooks and live within their means, the government should do that as well. And one of the things that I want to see enacted in that special legislative session that we have right away is the Taxpayer Protection Act, which limits the growth of government spending. It ties it to population growth and ties it to inflation. Okay, right now it's just,
Does any state do that?
there are other states that have similar laws, and Pennsylvania has had that sort of thing floated out there where Democrats are interested in, right? They just want to do is blow out the spending whenever it suits them. So the Taxpayer Protection Act would be one of the first things that I want to see passed. And that's one of the reasons why, the fact that we don't have the fiscal discipline is one of the reasons why we have one of the worst taxing climates in any state, right? If you're just gonna blow out the spending, well, you gotta have that high corporate tax, you gotta have that high gas tax, you need to soak the citizens. So we need to have government get its house in order for the economy to thrive.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'm gonna go ahead and end our Zoom. We'll see you guys later.
Thank you.